An F-rank newbie adventurer, he trained hard and unlocked S-rank power to become the strongest hero. The anime begins as the man is getting absolutely destroyed while training, and he fears that he will not survive. A group of onlookers are glad to see that he has improved over the past couple of years, and they determine that the upcoming E-rank test won't be a problem for him. A while later, entrants for the E-rank promotion test are registered. Our protagonist Rick is one of them, and the receptionist named Alicia is happy to see him again. It's been 2 years since they last saw each other, and it was when Rick used to be a guild clerk. She was surprised to hear that Rick became an adventurer, and he can't blame her, because starting off as an adventurer at age 30 is pretty unthinkable. Normally people start off as F-rank apprentices when they are teenagers and become E-rank just 2 years after that. Alicia wonders where he has been, so Rick explains that he was up in the mountains training with some senior adventurers. Some unruly drunk guy tries to make advances towards Alicia, but Rick calms him down. Everyone's attention turns to them when the guy passes out, so Rick reminds everyone to drink responsibly. Alicia gives him his exam ticket and wishes Rick luck on the E-rank test. Rick is horrified though, when his ticket has a really unlucky number of 4,242. Outside, Rick told some girl named Rionette that he finished registering, and she reminds him where her eyes are. Back inside, everyone is shocked to see an imprint of Rick's hand on their drunk guy's armor because it's made of steel. What's even more shocking is that the drunk guy is an infamous former A-rank adventurer. His name is Domold, the Fiendish Knight, and he is a wanted criminal. Alicia's then shocked when she wonders if Rick has become strong enough to easily leave an imprint and steel armor. A while later, Rick's height is measured and the examiners are shocked to see that he's 32 years old. After that, participants have their magical energy tested by putting their hands on a crystal ball. A couple of guys get D- and one girl gets a C+. Rick's turn is next, but the light he generates from the crystal is pathetic, and he's given an F-. The others have never seen a score so low, and they hope they never end up like Rick. Rick leaves, but the examiner is shocked when the crystal ball breaks. The next exam has participants attack something to measure the force they can generate. The device can absorb insanely powerful attacks, so participants are told not to hold back. This device is a slime bag, and a look into the past shows someone teaching Rick about it. He was told that the human body is the foundation of a good fighter regardless of what weapons or magic they have. Rick was instructed to destroy the golden slime bag with his bare hands, because once he could do that, he will have built a body that he could trust. However, this golden slime bag is known for being as strong as dragon's teeth. Rick was sure that he wouldn't be able to destroy it with his bare hands, but he was told that doing so is simple for an adventurer. His instructor revealed that he could destroy 200 once and demonstrated a bit of his power. Rick had to work his way up by hitting the bag with 50,000 punches every single day. Back to the present, one guy impresses everyone when he attacks a bag using strengthening magic. Some little guy is up next, and he declares that the time to show his strength has finally come. This kid is the second son of the Duke, and rumors say that even though he's just 11 years old, he has magic equivalent to a C rank. This child prodigy then shocks everyone when he prepares his attack. His setup is truly a grand display, but everyone is shocked from the attack turns out to be a tiny fireball. Everyone is still impressed by the damage it does, and they call him a genius. Rick is in awe as well because the kid used level 3 nature composed blaze magic. Another look back at Rick's training shows some little girl using an insanely powerful fire attack on him. Both attacks were blaze attacks, but they looked really different, so Rick wonders if the kid compressed his for indoor use. Soon it is Rick's turn, but the examiner doesn't expect much from him. If magic isn't trained at a young age, then the chances for growth later in life is impossible. On top of that, Rick's results from the magic test were pitiful, so the examiner recommends that Rick just give up now. Rick actually agrees with everything he said, but he can't help but think back to his training. Rick was exhausted from punching the bag one day, but he refused to give up. Rick acknowledges that he started his journey really late, but he believes that his age wouldn't matter. Because of this, Rick strikes the bag and shocks everyone when he absolutely destroys it with a single punch. Rick doesn't even know his own strength though, as he wonders if the bag was just defective. Everyone watches in terror as they wonder who he is. The kid is furious at Rick for stealing the attention, but he plans to show off during the defensive ability test. Moments later though, we see that everyone is shocked again when Rick defends against level 4 nature composed magic, something the kid couldn't even do. The examiner is surprised to hear that Rick only used level 1 magic to block the attack, so he decides to go up one level for the next one. He will use level 5 attack magic, so the examiner suggests that Rick use something higher than level 1 defense magic. Rick then shocks everyone yet again when he reveals that he can only use level 1 magic on offense and defense. Rick assures the examiner that he will be okay though, so the examiner takes offense as he believes that Rick is underestimating him. The examiner decides not to hold back and starts his incantation. He unleashes the level 5 attack, shocking everyone with its immense power, and even some knight worries about it from really far away. His name is Sylvester, and he rushes to the arena because he couldn't believe such a powerful attack will be used during an exam. Sylvester has then informed about Rick and how he was able to block a level 5 attack with just level 1 defense magic. He assumes it must be some kind of joke, but he is told that it isn't. It's just an impressive 32-year-old F-ranked adventurer. Rick's report reveals that he was a good receptionist for 13 years. Sylvester doesn't seem to know what a receptionist is though, and Rick's power makes them wonder if it's a title given to someone who has defeated a dragon. After the written exam, Rick expresses how confident he is that he aced it. Just then the prodigy named Freed angrily approaches Rick. Rick barely remembers this kid, so he assumes that he's lost and offers to help him find his parents. The kid is furious though and explains a risk to call the attention away from him. Just then Freed's older sister, Angelica, arrives and is upset that Rick made her brother cry. Freed says that the 40-year-old man ruined everything, but Rick angrily corrects him by saying that he's only in his 30s. Angelica only believes her brother though and challenges the 40-year-old man to a duel. Rick points that she just got her glove dirty, but Rionette explains that picking up the glove means he has accepted the duel. Moments later, the two arrive in an arena and Angelica declares that she must punish the old man. Duels in the kingdom allow each participant to propose one condition for the duel. Angelica proposes that the loser must act as the victor's servant until the end of their life, and her brother cheers her on. Angelica is a second-class knight, and Rick is shocked to hear that this means she's the same level as a B-rank adventurer. B-rank adventurers are powerful enough to defeat monsters on their own, but Rionette still tells Rick to take it easy on her. Rick thinks she has it all wrong though and points out that he's just an F-rank adventurer that just registered a couple days ago. Rick fears that he won't make it out of the duel alive, so Rionette tells him to just remember his training from the past 2 years. Rick begins to be inspired by the training montage that plays in his head, but he remembers how terrible it was, and it just makes him throw up. Rionette tells them to be more confident and reminds him of the group that trained him. The group, called the legendary Orihalcon Fist, prides itself on being the strongest in the continent, and they consider Rick to be one of its members. Rick thanks Rionette for restoring his confidence and steps up to Angelica. Angelica knows that Rick is an F rank, so she promises to refrain from ending his life. She prepares for the fight, and Rick can tell that she's a swordsman type that strengthens her body and weapons. Angelica wonders if he will be able to keep up with her speed, and Rick is shocked when she flies right past him. She explains that she slowed down just a bit for Rick, and she wonders if he's not talking because of how shocked he is. The little nerd laughs at the 40-year-old and explains that people call his sister the Flash because of how fast she is. Angelica declares that she will actually attack him this time without holding back, and she uses her incredibly fast attack again. Rick goes quiet again, but we see that it's actually because how slow he sees Angelica moving. It's even slower than when Rick walks, so he wonders why anyone would call her the Flash. Rick easily dodges her attack, but Angelica thinks he just got lucky because only a handful of first-class knights are able to properly react to her speed. She is sure that he won't be able to dodge it a second time, but Rick is once again unimpressed by how slow she is moving. He can't believe that she's a knight and wonders if she became one through nepotism. Rick considers for a moment that he might actually be really strong, but he then laughs at the thought. Rick prepares to dodge the attack again, but Angelica trips and starts barreling towards him. Rick just barely manages to dodge her out of control attack, but Rick is oblivious. He couldn't read her movements at all and assumes that it was an incredible skill of hers. This little incident makes him remember that he's just an F rank, and there's a huge gap in skill between him and his second-class knight. Angelica knows that she actually tripped, but decides to pretend like the attack was on purpose. She declares that she will attack again, but move even faster this time. Her next attack takes a great toll on her body though, so she can only use it 3 times. She uses the attack that's supposed to be way faster, but it's still pretty slow on Rick's eyes. The clueless Rick fears that she might use another terrifying rolling attack again if he makes the wrong move, so he dodges carefully. Angelica is shocked and wonders what she should do because you can only use the attack 2 more times. She decides to use her last 2 attacks in succession and Rick realizes that he needs to fight back. Just then Angelica trips again on her last attempt. Rick thinks it's another terrifying technique and fears that his attack won't land in time. Dust goes everywhere and everyone watches in shock. When the dust clears we see that Rick's attack created a crater in the ground. Angelica is horrified as she realizes that if she didn't trip then Rick's terrifyingly powerful attack would have landed on her. The clueless Rick thinks that she purposely dodged it though, and she wonders who this guy is. Rick explains that he's just an F-rank adventurer. There used to be a good receptionist 2 years ago. Rick isn't sure he can do much against a second-class knight, but he will do his best during their duel and use it as a learning experience. He excitedly prepares to continue their fight, but he is shocked when Angelica just surrenders. Freed is shocked as well, and Angelica says that she will let him win this time. She tries to get out of there as quickly as possible, but Rick reminds her about the duel conditions. Rick didn't actually propose anything, but he's fine with using hers. Angelica doesn't want to serve him for the rest of her life, so she asks her legs to exceed their limits just one more time and runs away. Rick doesn't really consider it a victory, but Rionette reminds them that it's time for the results of the preliminary test. Just then Rick is shocked when Rionette reveals that the other members of their group will be arriving soon. The terrified Rick wonders what they're coming, so Rionette explains that they want to see how Rick is doing. Rick has a really bad feeling about it, but it's too late as we see that the others are on their way. The Akashic Record, a treasure which grants any wish, is given to anyone who defeats the ultimate monster Kaiser Alsapiet. An adventurer was unable to defeat the monster when he had an encounter with it, but he hoped that someday one of the upcoming adventurers would be able to bring down the beasts and make up for his failure. Meanwhile, Alicia announces to the adventurer the 3rd test will be released momentarily. She tells them that mana will be sent to their exam tickets, and the tickets of those who passed with glow blue. She further informed them that the successful candidates will participate in a mock battle in the 2nd stage the next day. Rick isn't in good spirits because he's not confident that he will pass, but Rionette consoles him, reassuring him that he would ace the test. She informs him that he would have to triple his training if he somehow fails the test, which makes Rick pray to all the existing deities to pass the test. His ticket suddenly lightens up and he stares at it anxiously wondering if he'll pass. His ticket glows blue after a while and he rejoices, informing Rionette that he passed. She congratulates him on his success and they leave the classroom as Rick expresses his release because he doesn't have to return to training. A foul stench suddenly fills the air and Rick can't help recover his nose, wondering where the stench is from. A noble suddenly approaches Rionette and introduces himself as Raster Diarmut, the first son of the Duke of Diamond who rules over the north. Rick is having a hard time remembering his name, so he decides to call him Northie. Raster asks Rionette's name and she introduces herself to him. While the Raster is marveled by how sweet Rionette's name sounds, he frowns at Rick when he introduces himself because he has no business with someone like him. Rick is heartbroken by this, but Raster doesn't care about that as he turns his attention back to Rionette. He tries using his not-so-superior line to pick up Rionette, but he can't even pique her interest in the slightest. Raster continues regardless, asking Rionette to become his second wife. Rick is set up with his advances and he decides to come in between them, which pisses off Raster. Wondering why an old man was being so nosy, Rick informed Raster that he can't keep hitting on Rionette because she's his girlfriend. Raster is surprised to learn this, but notices Rick's participation ticket, which cracks him up. He can't believe Rick was still an F-rank hero in his old age. Rick assumes that Raster is also there for the exam and tries to pull an Uno reverse car on him. But Raster is disappointed with his assessment capabilities, telling him that he already made it to E rank when he was 14. He informs Rick that he's just there to be an examiner for the second part of the exam because he is an A rank adventurer. Raster shows Rick his crest and he asks Rionette to leave Rick because he's worse than a commoner and join him for dinner. Rionette kindly turns down his request, telling him that she's dating Rick, who's so red on his face that he almost explodes. She also teases Raster, saying that his perfume has a disturbing smell which isn't very pleasant. Rick now knows where the origin of the smell is, but Raster is pissed off by their insults and he promises to show Rick the difference in their capability if he ends up being his examiner. He walks away fuming, hoping to have a chance to prove to Rionette that she made the wrong decision. Rick didn't like that he was already starting on the wrong foot with his potential examiner, and he hoped that Raster wouldn't turn out to be his examiner during the exam. Raster went for dinner at the castle, but was still sewing from his encounter with Rick. He promised himself that he would prove to Rick that he was superior to him. Fried and Angelica suddenly come running to him with tears running down their faces, and he's surprised by this, wondering what is making them sad. Fried tells him that he was disgraced by an old man during the test, while Angelica tells him that the same man almost disgraced her by explaining her duel. Raster is pissed that some old man had committed such an unforgivable sin, but then he suddenly figures out that the man could be Rick. Then he asks Fried for the old man's participant number, and Fried tells him it was an unlucky number, confirming his suspicions. Raster is pleased that he will have the chance to disgrace Rick during the second part of the exam and also get his revenge for what he did to his siblings. The next day, Rick and Rionette are walking to the location of the second test when Rionette reminds Rick to hold back. Rick tells her he can't hold that, especially as Raster turns out to be his examiner. Rick is filled with dread at this possibility, but a guy named Lynx suddenly stops him on the way and informs him that he would be in charge of his tests in the second stage. Rick is rejoicing because Raster isn't his examiner, but Lynx expresses how unusual it is for a 30-year-old receptionist to switch jobs and become an adventurer. Rick thinks Lynx is making fun of him, but Lynx expresses how impressed he is by his determination. Lynx is glad that a fellow middle-aged man like him can inspire others to chase their dreams regardless of their age. Lynx felt a sense of déjà vu because he became an adventurer at 24 years old, so he knew that Rick had a goal in mind. Lynx informs Rick that he's yet to achieve his dream of getting to A rank despite being in his 40s because it took him 20 years to get to B ranked. Rick was impressed by Lynx's passion at his age and eager to get into the mock battle with him. Lynx warns Rick that he won't hold back, but he gives him a handshake and invites him for a drink after the tests. Around the corner, Raster is silently eavesdropping on their conversation with a naughty smile. Lynx felt how much Rick trained just by shaking his hand, so he decided to train even harder. As he returns to his coders, Raster corners him so they can discuss. In the prep room, Rick is very cheerful and Rionette notices this, but a messenger suddenly comes into the room bearing news for participants numbered 4200 and the above. He tells them Lynx has fallen ill and their new examiners will be Raster Diarmut. Rick doesn't recognize the name, so Rionette informs him that it's the Northie from the previous day. She tells him Raster may be related to Angelica and Fried since they all bear the same surnames, and Rick can't believe his ears. The other participants express concerns because they're scared of Raster. Rionette wonders what the big deal about him is, and one participant tells her that Raster is nicknamed the F-Rank Crusher because he torments participants that grab his attention. Rick realized that he was in a bad situation because he gained not just Raster's attention but also his wrath. Raster enters a mock battle with one of the participants and he easily defeats him with his nature-imposed ice magic. He expresses his disappointment in how powerless commoners are, but an elite guard suddenly calls his attention to give him a message. Meanwhile, Rick was having a meltdown wondering what he would do to get out of his predicament, but Rionette tells him there's no point worrying. Rick tells her that he wants to go home, but he remembers that his training would triple if he does that, so he decides to make peace with the fact that he won't achieve his dreams. Rionette advises him to gain inspiration from others who tried to tell him he couldn't achieve his dreams instead of allowing their words to weigh him down. She assures him he will pass the test and defeat the perfume noble because she believes in him. She informs him that she always believed in him from the first day she decided to become an adventurer. Rick is so moved by her words that he regains his confidence. A hooded figure suddenly comes up to Rick and offers to help him through his midlife crisis through fortune-telling. The figure tells him that he doesn't have to be suspicious and he offers to give him a free trial first. Rick feels reassured by this and he takes a seat with the figure. Rionette notices a spell on the seat, but she can't act quickly enough as Rick disappears as soon as he sits. Fried praises himself for being an Oscar-worthy actor because he got Rick to fall into his trap, but Rionette suddenly threatens him and asks him to spill the location where Rick was still awarded to. Fried tries to be tough and withhold the information, but Rionette demonstrates her powers and Fried spills the beans like a broken tap head. He tells her that Rick isn't too far from the location because he can only manage to use teleportation magic within 100 meters of his location. Rick wonders where he is, wondering if he's behind the arena when suddenly surrounded by mercenaries hired by the elite guards. Rick thinks they have mistaken, but they introduce themselves as the elite guards of Diarmut. Rick realizes that Raster is behind his predicament. The guards promise to make sure he is in no condition to take the test, but Rick is disappointed that they have to resort to such dirty tricks. The chief guard informs them that they're all equivalent to B-ranked and A-rank adventurers, and Rick realizes that he won't be able to get away unscathed. His masters suddenly come into view, wondering why Rick was outside the arena instead of taking his test. Rick tells Brufston that the guards are helping him train as an excuse, but the guards debunk his claims, threatening to take down his masters if they don't leave immediately. Rick begs the chief guard to call his men off, but he tells them to take down the masters instead. One of the guards tries to use his sword on Brufston, but his sword shatters as soon as it makes contact. Brufston expresses how impressed he is that the guard has trained his body, but he expresses disappointment at his negligence of weapon strengthening. The guard gets pissed off and tries to throw hands, but his fist is crushed like a cereal flake. Brufston heals his hand and advises him on improvements in his fighting form. The guards are surprised that an orc can talk and use magic. The chief guard suddenly recognizes them as the members of the strongest party. Mizet figures out that Rick is being bullied and decides to handle things peacefully with his newest invention, a custom gun with magic crystals and lead bullets. The other guards decided to go for the other masters since Brufston seems so powerful, but Mizet takes them down with his weapon. He asks Rick if he wants a shot with his weapon, but Rick turns in his request. The chief guard was now sure of his theory that they were members of the strongest party. Another guard threatens to take down Elissaret if anyone moves the muscle, but they advise him to let her go for his good. Elissaret wonders what the guard is doing, and Rick tells her he wants to play with her. Elissaret is open to playing with the guards, but he hurts her instead, and she gets triggered. She unleashes a high-grade nature magic that sends the guard flying, to the horror of others. The chief now recognizes Elissaret the vampire mage, who is the youngest and strongest magic user. Mizet half-elf half-dwarf is the best weapons craftsman. Brufston the orc with great intelligence and superhuman strength. The chief guard tells the other guards that they're all S-ranked adventurers who are members of the Orihalcon Fist, the strongest party in the continent, consisting as only S-rank adventurers. The chief guard is so entranced by their presence that he decides to retire and live in peace. Rick decides to return to his test, while his master handles things. Meanwhile, Fried wonders how long Rionette would keep holding him hostage, and she tells him she would keep it up till Rick returns. Fried tells her that Rick won't return because he's walking into an ambush by his family's elite guard. He is surprised when Rick comes back on skates, and he wonders how he made it out without a scratch. Rick apologizes to him as Rionette tosses him away like a worthless rag doll. Lynx suddenly walks into the room looking hurt, and Rick helps him to a bed. Lynx informs Rick that Raster was the one who hurt him and made up the story that he fall ill. Lynx was disappointed that he couldn't stand a chance against Raster, but Rick wondered why Raster would go to such lengths just to be his examiner. Lynx recounts how Raster beat him up after he told him about his dream to build a school which kids who want to become adventurers can attend. Raster told him his dream was worthless because he could only manage to build up a third-grade school since he's a third-rate adventurer. Lynx is disappointed that he couldn't say something back to Raster and advises Rick to forfeit the exam so he doesn't experience a worse fate. Rick reassures Lynx, saying he will be fine as he steps out of the room towards the arena. Raster easily takes down another participant when one of his guards returns and apologizing for failing his mission. Raster is surprised that Rick still came out for the test because he thought he would be discouraged by everything he said against him. Raster decides to give Rick a taste of true suffering, but Rick is unfazed by his threats and silently promising to take him down for what he did to Lynx. The story continues. We see a guy named Adolf, and he's going to tell us about the 4 cores of power in this world. They are strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control, and it just so happens that Adolf was born with a special ability to tell exactly how much power a person possesses by looking at them. To demonstrate, he looks at a random examining and sees that the guy is a total weakling, so expectedly he gets taken out by Raster immediately. On the other hand, Raster is a powerhouse with most of his stats going into mana capacity, so it hurts a little for Adolf to look at him since scanning strong people strains his eyes. As a result, when he took a look at Rick, straight up went blind. Meanwhile, on the stands, Rick's former coworker goes up to Rionette and introduces herself as Elisa Granger and says she's seen Rick with Rionette the day before, so when Rionette tells her that she's part of Rick's party, Elisa has overjoyed to hear that Rick has new friends, and since everyone was getting ready to watch Rick's test, Rionette invites Elisa to join them. She happily agrees and walks over to the seats, but she is shocked by Brufston being here since he's an orc. Mizet invites Rionette to sit next to him, but she politely declines since Mizet is guaranteed to harass her if she sits anywhere near him. Just then, Mizet misses the girl standing behind Rionette and asks who she is, so Rionette introduces her as Rick's former coworker and Elisa greets them all. Mizet nervous is the huge personality Elisa has, so he eagerly offers her the seat next to him, but Rionette isn't going to let Elisa fall victim to Mizet's perverted intentions. Just then, Rick steps out into the arena, so Brufston asks Rionette how she thinks Rick will do in the exam. She confidently says Rick will pass the exam without incident, but Elisa doesn't think he'll be that easy. She says Raster is an A-rank adventurer and he is known for using excessive force to beat down the E-rank adventurers, but if Raster is just A-rank then Brufston is sure Rick won't have any trouble. As the fight is about to begin, Angelica and a badly injured Freed cheer for Raster to teach Rick a lesson, and Raster intends to. He doesn't know how Rick managed to escape the guys who were meant to beat him up, but they are nowhere near as strong as him. Rick asks Raster why he became an adventurer, and Raster answers that he just did it for the status, since so long as he has a high rank, he used to beat up rookies for fun. He doesn't actually have to put himself in any danger, and he can show his adventurer card anytime someone questions his authority. If his reasons are truly so shallow, then Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick and he intentionally misses, but Rick didn't move an inch. He mocks Rick for being frozen in fear, but the real reason Rick is standing still is because Rionette had advised him to use the first minute of the battle to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Raster is getting ready to attack Rick for real this time, so he casts a level 3 fire spell at Rick, and Rick is impressed by Raster casting such a spell so quickly, but he has to keep observing so he can't dodge it. The fire blast hits Rick head on, and while Elisa is really worried about him, Rick turns out to be perfectly fine. Brufston tells Elisa that Rick is strong enough that a blast like that has no chance of damaging him. He explains that of the 4 cores of power, mana capacity must be trained from an early age, otherwise one loses all hope of growing in that category. It usually has a limit of about 20, so since Rick became an adventurer at the age of 30 his mana capacity is really low, which is why he puts so much effort into training the other areas. Brufston trained him in physical strength and had Rick do things like running between villages but with giant 100-kilogram ankle weights attached and venomous snakes that chase him through the forest. Brufston did everything he could to build up Rick's strength and Mizet trained him in mana control. It's honestly surprising that Mizet didn't give up on teaching halfway through since he never liked working, but when it came to Rick he wanted to make sure that Rick could put up some good magical defenses, otherwise he would have been a pilot ash by now. He also says Rionette was the one who trained Rick in dexterity, and this comes as a shock to Elisa since she thought Rionette was a maid, but Rionette just enjoys wearing maid outfits for fun. Rick put everything he has into learning from them, so he already possesses the power of an S-rank adventurer, although he doesn't realize it since Brufston kept gaslighting him into thinking F-rank adventurers were much stronger than him. As Raster is about to cast another spell, he begins insulting Rick and Lynx for being too old to stick around in the adventure business, and as he says this he throws every elemental attack in his skill tree at Rick. By the time he's done, he believes Rick must be dead or at least severely injured, but to his and his siblings' horror, Rick survived all of that without a single scratch. Raster is starting to get annoyed by how resilient Rick is, so he decides that he will finish Rick off with his bare hands. He casts a strengthening spell on his hands and feet before rushing in to attack Rick, but as he throws a punch, Rick counters with the punch of his own and blows Raster back. Rionette's advice really paid off since Rick has watched Raster for long enough that he now sees the truth. While Raster does have a larger mana capacity than him, that's all he has. He ever took the time or effort to truly refine his powers, so he has the potential to be stronger than Rick, but as of this moment, Rick understands that he is stronger than Raster. Raster tries to pass off Rick's successful counterpunch as a fluke, so he is going to get serious and casting full incantation spells take Rick out. Go all spell looked pretty impressive. Rick was able to block it with one hand and even insults Raster for his sloppy spell execution. Elisa doesn't understand how Rick could possibly block his spell of that level with his low mana capacity, so Mizet explains that Rick learned to have great control over his mana use, so even the Raster has more mana. Rick can use 100,000 times less mana to match Raster's spell casting. Raster's confidence is starting to falter, so he tries one last attack to prove that he's stronger, but Rick is far too fast for him and delivers a punch that forces Raster to use Iron Body defense magic. By this point Raster has realized that Rick possesses far more power than the average E rank, but he still claims that he has just been getting lucky with his attacks up to this point. But Rick isn't falling for any more gaslighting. He knows that everything up till now has been a result of his strength, and on top of that, Rick didn't even use any strengthening magic, yet he was able to to overpower Raster after he used it to attack. Raster realizes he can't bluff his way out of this, so he asks Rick how he managed to become so strong. He possesses very little mana, but Rick feels insulted that Raster thinks he used some cheat trick. He was thrown into a dragon's lair and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He got blasted over and over with extremely powerful explosions, and then he was forced to swim for a swab of monster gula until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all that, but in reality, Rick didn't survive, but since process healing magic is so powerful, as long as it was applied quickly, no matter how many times Rick ended up dying, he always brought him back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations, and it is honestly surprising how well Rick handled it, since none of them had any regard for his safety. So if Mizet rushed him off a cliff for training and he died, he just called Brufston to heal him. The same thing happened with Elissaret's training and Rionet's training, leading to several life-ending injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of it though, since even if there was a way for Rick to train like that, what reason would he have to willingly put himself through hell like that? Rick says he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alsapiet. Raster begins laughing at Rick because he thinks the monster is nothing more than an old story. But in truth, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orihalcon parties to one day eliminates it. Raster doesn't believe the monster exists and calls Rick dumb for believing in children's story, but Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with him. Raster is tired of listening to Rick's stories, so he says he will now end this fight once and for all and uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place. He then begins to chant for the strongest spell he has available, the level 8 nature composed magic. With this, Raster believes the fight has been won, since there's no way Rick would be able to overpower his spell this powerful. However, Rick begins charging up a level 1 air shot to fight back. Raster laughs at him and says a mere level 1 spell could never beat his level 8 spell. Yet Rick is still completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's level 8 spell, and that's because Raster has used this spell handful of times at most, so he hasn't refined it to its utmost capabilities. On the other hand, Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times already, so he has learned how to unleash his full potential. No one believes Rick's claim of using the spell 100 million times, since it is physically impossible to have done that in only 2 years, but Brufston assures Elisa that Rick is telling the truth, although he needed space-time magic to make it possible. Raster still doesn't believe it though, so he's ready to smash Rick into the ground and finish this, but as he gets ready to punch, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his arms and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is certain that he has won now that he has landed his attack, but then his mix started crumbling from Rick's power, before finally being shattered to pieces and sending Raster flying off into the stands, and he is still alive, but his pride definitely isn't. Hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, as an E-rank adventure just defeated an A rank, although Rick's friends totally expected this outcome. After Rick returns to the locker room, the other go to meet him and congratulate him on winning fight, especially Elisa, who's really impressed by how strong he has gotten. Rick finally understands that he is really strong, and he doesn't know why he didn't realize it sooner, but he thanks his friends for training him so well. They tell him there's no need to thank them so formally, and instead they should all go out to celebrate at a bar. But before that, Rick hears the voices of Raster and his siblings entering the room, and Raster is clearly feeling the pain from Rick's punch, but he refuses to get treated for it. As Rick sees him, he starts telling Raster that there's a reason he lost the match today. Raster doesn't want to hear any mockery from Rick, but Rick is trying to give him some genuine advice. So he tells Raster that while he was training, he limited the number of techniques he would use in order to master them fully, so for Raster wishes to grow stronger, he should refine a single technique until he tells like he's going to die, but he doesn't have to follow the advice if he doesn't want to. Rick says he has high hopes for Raster's future as an adventurer, and it looks like Raster has finally learned some humility, since he sadly walks past Rick and tells him that when the time comes for Rick's next promotion exam, Raster will make sure he is strong enough so that he doesn't lose his second time. Raster then leaves and his siblings follow after him, but before leaving, Angelica lowers her head to apologize for all the trouble she caused Rick, and then she helps Raster walk out. After that, the E-rank exams have officially concluded, so an announcement is made for the candidates who passed. As the numbers are called, Rick eagerly awaits his own, and meanwhile the others have already started a preemptive celebratory feast for him, since they are sure there's no way he will fail. Rick ends up passing his exam, but he seems a lot more calm about it than Rionette expected, and it's because he has a lot of stuff to think about. The story continues. We see Rick recalls a time in his childhood when he read a book about a hero fighting ultimate monster Kaiser Alsapiet in order to obtain the Akashic Records, but ultimately the hero fails to defeat it, so he left the Akashic Records to be found by future generations of adventurers. This was the moment Rick first decided that he wanted to become an adventurer just like the one in history book, but his mother wasn't too keen on him becoming an adventurer since the job is pretty dangerous, so she nicely tells Rick that she would be more at ease if he chose a different career. However, Rick's father was much less nice about it and told Rick that he should get a real job before throwing his life away as an adventurer. One day after a checkup, Rick was congratulated by his physician who tells him that he possessed an innate skill. Rick is in disbelief because innate skill is an insanely rare attribute which makes him pretty similar to Yamato, the hero, but the doctor reminded him that innate skill aren't things that can be awoken through hard work, so it's going to take some time before he is able to use his ability. However, Rick was still every bit as happy as could be since this brought him one step closer to being able to declare himself as a successful adventurer to his parents. The next day, Rick wakes up and tells his friends that he's got an innate and when he's finally able to use it, it's going to be amazing. However, they soon turn to weeks to months, and eventually Rick had to come to terms with the fact that his innate skill would never manifest. His friends were sympathetic with him and encouraged Rick to try becoming an adventurer anyway since most adventurers don't have innate abilities anyway, plus adventurers make a ton of money so it's not a bad job. However, the reason Rick wanted to become an adventurer, it wasn't for the money but to become like the hero Yamato, so since he can't become the kind of adventurer he was hoping to be, he decides to go get a real job after all. Rick tells his parents about his decision and they are overjoyed to hear that Rick has finally given up on his dreams and is ready to get his soul-crushing job like a normal person. The next few years went by with Rick learning the ropes of the receptionist and watching countless adventurers all living out his dream, so as time went on, Rick became more and more jaded to reality until finally, he grew to accept his mediocre life and enjoy the time he spent with his friends and family. One day, while looking for his old books, he finds that storybook of Yamato's legendary adventures, but by now it's nothing more than an old fairy tale he used to believe in. Rick had on to work the next day and Elisa had just been hired at the time, so she was struggling to keep up with all the paperwork. Rick came over and helped her out a bit and reminded her that there was no need to rush the learning process since she will get the hang of it sooner or later. There's also one more thing he wants to tell her since from what he has seen around town monsters are becoming more active, so a quest for likely pop up soon to subjugate them. Elisa is thankful for the heads up since she can now get the forms ready ahead of time. As Elisa leaves to go get the paperwork done and adventurer Rick is friends who walks in, he's got something to show Rick. He just got back from his promotion exam and he's proud to say that he's officially a rank B adventurer from this day onwards. Rick is happy for his friend, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't jealous seeing someone get to live out his dream of becoming an adventurer. To deal with the jealousy, Rick does what any responsible adult would do and drinks late into the night to make the pain go away, but even with his drunken state, the difference between himself and Zaid are crystal clear. Zaid has been promoted all the way up to B rank and is living Rick's life, while Rick has sat in the same chair for 14 years at this point, and he has nothing to show for it other than a stable income and a few yearly pay raises. It's not like he thinks he wasted his life, but he can't help but wonder how far he could have come if he chose to become an adventurer after all back then. Just then Rick hears a commotion in the middle of town and he goes to check it out and see if he can help. However, when he sees terrifies him since for whatever reason, there's a mid-rank hand troll in the city. Under normal circumstances as soon as Rick saw that thing he would have run away, but he notices a woman walks right into the path of the troll and he can't just stand by while someone gets hurt, so runs out in front of the woman to try and protect her from the troll, even if he can't really do much to hold it back. As the monster closes in on them, Rick braces himself for a gruesome death, but before that could happen, Rionette walks out in front of Rick and slashes the monster pieces. She then tells Rick that she appreciates him trying to protect her, but there's no need to be concerned for her safety since she is a skilled adventurer. After that, Rick and Rionette walk together and introduce themselves to one another, after which, Rick says he was really impressed with how strong Rionette was back there, so he asked her if she happens to be a rank B adventurer. Rionette says she's not B rank, so Rick assumes she must be A rank and he's amazed since it's a rare occasion to meet an A rank adventurer out in town. But Rionette correction once more and says she's not an A rank either. She then pulls out her S rank badge to prove her rank to Rick, and the shock Rick feels is immeasurable. S rank adventurers are so powerful and rare that this is his first time meeting one. In fact, there are rumors that HQ intentionally takes them out of the local guild registers and oversees their missions directly. He can't believe he gets to meet such a legendary adventure, but since she's here, he says he has a weird question to ask, so he pleases with Rionette not to laugh at him. Rionette assures him that she hasn't laughed even once in the 9 years after her 8th birthday, but Rick isn't sure if she should be proud of that. Moving on, Rick tells Rionette about the dream he had when he was younger to become an adventurer and eventually defeat Kaiser Alsapiat, so he wants to know if she thinks he could still achieve his dream. He tried becoming an adventurer today, even though he's already 30. After seeing how Rick acted when he thought she was in danger, she is sure that he possesses the courage necessary to become an adventurer, but Rick must be aware of the importance of mana reserves to adventures. Rick says he is aware that mana reserves are hard to develop unless it is done during your youth, but difficult is an understatement, as Rionette believes it is practically impossible to build your mana reserves once you grow older. Considering the importance of mana reserves to adventuring, Rionette has to be honest with him and says she doesn't think Rick could make it as an adventurer if he started as he is now. Rick was already expecting an answer like that, but it still hurts to hear. At the very least, he finds closure in the fact that it was an S-rank adventurer who broke the news to him, so there's nothing left to do but give up on his dreams and settle into his ordinary life. Rionette apologizes as she made Rick feel bad, but he says it's fine since he appreciates her honesty, plus it's not every day he gets to meet a lady as pretty as her, so he even invites her to grab a meal with him sometime. Although he was only joking, Rionette immediately agrees his dinner invitation and offers to meet him tomorrow for their date. The next day, Rick is in a really good mood, so he wants to work even harder than usual today. Even when Zaid comes in and brags about his new B rank status, Rick doesn't show even a hint of jealousy and wishes him luck on his next quest. By the end of the day, Rick is happily skipping down the road to meet up with Rionette, and he is slightly hoping that they could start dating if things end up going well on their date, but then he hears people screaming that monsters are attacking, so unfortunately, his date plans are ruined since Rionette was supposed to meet him nearby. Rick assumes she must already be fighting the monsters, so if he rushes to check on her. Although she seems to be doing alright on her own, there are a lot of monsters approaching, so Rionette asks Rick to stand back while she handles this, and he lets her do her things. Moments later, the battlefield is covered with hundreds of monster chunks, and Rionette looks like she's barely even warmed up, but all of a sudden, she senses something that gives her flashbacks to the death of everyone she loved, and the trauma makes her fall to her knees. A monster happens to show up right as Rionette is having a panic attack, and Rick isn't equipped to defend her, but luckily, Zaid steps in the last second that saves them both. Rick is thankful, but he also doesn't know why Zaid is here in the first place. Just then, 2 other adventurers showed to help as well, and Zaid tells Rick that the guild put out an emergency quest to subjugate these monsters, so they all rushed over to help, and since they are here now, Rick should hurry up and get his date to safety while they handle the rest of the monsters. While the adventurers are fighting the monsters, Rick realizes that he's still as jealous of them as he has always been. After Rionette regains some of her composure, she warns Rick that it's dangerous for him to be here. Rick tries to reassure her that the B-rank adventurers will be able to handle the rest of the monsters, but Rionette says they won't be strong enough to handle what's coming. She tells Rick that there's a dragon nearby and she won't be able to fight it due to years of unaddressed trauma that causes her to lose control of the magic within her body whenever she senses a dragon. Rick doesn't believe a dragon would appear all the way out here, but in the next moment, something flies overhead, and as Rick looks up, he spots the dragon Rionette was talking about. It makes more sense for a dragon to show up in a human town. According to the guild's recommendations, if an adventurer lower than A rank ends up encountering a dragon, the only thing they can do is stand still and pray that the dragon leaves on its own, and no matter what, no one should attack the dragon first. But the magician gets scared and does exactly what the rules said not to do, leading to the entire B rank group getting decimated. There's no way any of them can fight the dragon, so Zaid tells everyone to make a run for it, but as they try to escape they find themselves trapped in a barrier the dragon put up. It looks like the dragon doesn't intend to let any of them here alive and they stand no chance against it, but Rick begins walking straight up to the dragon. Zaid tells him to stop since there's nothing he can do to the dragon as a receptionist, but the way Rick sees it, if he's going to die anyway he might as well face to head on and die as an adventurer would. Rick thought he would feel better if he gave up on his dream of being an adventurer, but he still feels the fire inside pushing him to work towards that goal. He picks up a rock and throws it at the dragon, and it does absolutely nothing, but Rick's bravery motivates the other adventurers to try their best as well, even if they know they'll lose in the end. It all begins throwing every attack they have at the dragon, but it doesn't do much other than provoke the dragon into using its fire breath. Zaid realizes this is probably going to be bad, so he uses his iron body skill to protect everyone, and while it allows them to survive, they still suffer a considerable amount of damage from it. But from the flaming rubble, Rick gets up and walks straight over to the dragon, claiming that he will make his dream come true no matter what it takes. The dragon uses its foot to squish Rick, but on the verge of death, Rick's dormant innate skill awakens, giving him the power necessary to survive being stepped on and push the dragon away with ease. The amount of magic flowing from his body is so potent that it is actually visible, and Rick realizes that this must be his innate skill, so why he wishes it awakened earlier. It's better late than never. Now that he has the power necessary to fight back, Rick is a lot more confident about facing the dragon. So as the fires another blast at him, he stretches his hand out and blocks the fire with his magical energy, and when he finally gets the chance to counterattack, Rick unleashes a punch that Carlos a hole straight through the dragon's body, killing it in an instant. Once it's all over, Rick goes back to normal and collapses to the ground, and by the time he wakes up, he's in a hospital bed in great physical pain. Rionette is there as well and informs Rick that he overloaded every single magic circuit in his body during the fight with the dragon, so by all accounts, he should already be dead. He's been unconscious for about a week, and the entire time Rionette has been waiting by his bedside because she wants to personally invite Rick to join the party. She's a part of the Orihalcon Fist. The party's goal is to defeat Kaiser Alsapiat just like Rick, and after seeing Rick fight on courage alone, even when he didn't have the power to win, gives her the confidence to say that Rick can grow stronger and fight alongside the S-rank party and become an adventurer. This was the first time anyone ever supported the idea of Rick becoming an adventurer, so he's moved to tears by Rionette's faith in him. That leads us back to the present, where Rick has just officially passed his E-rank exam, so for the first time in his life, he can say that he's an adventurer. The story continues. We see Lynx walks through the forest, wondering how much further he has to go up the mountain before arriving at Rick's place. He recalls how he congratulated Rick after his successful completion of the promotion exams. He reminded Rick of the drink he promised him before the exam, and offered to come over to Rick's place for it so he could meet his party. Rick's face gave his emotions away, and Lynx couldn't understand why he made such a face. He kept moving through the forest, up the mountain, as he remembered that Rick warned him to wear his best gear if he was intent on coming to see him. He wonders why Rick gave him such a stern warning as he keeps following the directions. He arrives at a castle on the mountain and wonders if he was given the wrong directions to a demon lord's castle. Lynx walks up to the castle gates, where he stands in awe of its grandeur. Though scared for his life, he summons the courage to ring the castle bells. He calls out to Rick, and the huge gates suddenly give way to Rick's familiar face. Rick welcomes him to the castle, and Lynx gladly walks into the courtyard, admiring the scenery before him. Rick apologizes for bringing him to a distant location just to have a drink. Lynx points out his observation of the area being free of monsters, and Rick tells him monsters don't approach the castle. Lynx asks him why he warned him to wear his best armor, and Rick sternly tells him the armor is to ensure his body stays intact, which scares Lynx. Rionette welcomes Lynx as he enters the main castle with Rick. Lynx thanks her for the courtesy and expresses his appreciation for her contribution to saving his life. Elisarette calls out to Rick from the stair top, and Lynx is surprised by how lively she looks. He hopes his daughter grows up to become as lively as the little girl in the castle. She suddenly unleashes a level 6 nature level magic by saying trivial words, which surprises Lynx. Lynx can barely react to the spell in time to move out of harm's way, but Rick comes to his rescue, deflecting the magic spell away. Lynx is surprised that he's still alive, as Rick scolds Elisarette for using magic within the castle, which he warned her against. Elisarette blames Rick for it because he didn't play with her earlier when she requested. Rionette asks to deduct the fees for repairs from her meal, but Elisarette suddenly becomes remorseful and apologizes to Rionette, so she doesn't reduce her meal. Rick informs Lynx that he wants to accompany Elisarette so she doesn't keep using magic within the castle walls. Rionette leads Lynx to guest room and tells him to make himself comfortable as she leaves the room. Lynx stares out the window thinking he can't tour the full council because it's too big. He suddenly notices Mizet sitting outside, toying with his creations. He walks out to meet him and Mizet recognizes him as Rick's visitor. They exchange introductions and Lynx asks Mizet about his steel productions. Mizet shows off his custom weapon, explaining that crafting weapons is his hobby. Lynx decides to try out the model and Mizet hands it to him and giving him instructions on how to use it. Lynx couches to maintain his balance and he pulls the trigger targeting a training dummy. The launcher fires before sending Lynx to the ground as the target is destroyed. Mizet makes a note to reduce the recoil when he remodels it. Meanwhile, Lynx realizes that Mizet weapons can change the tide of war if mass-produced for the capital's army. He returns to the castle, wondering why such weird occupants inhabit it. He spots Brufston reading in the castle library and he's surprised to see an orc in the castle. Without raising his head, Brufston permits him to enter the room and Lynx apologizes for his intrusion. He enters the library and surprised by how many books are in it. Brufston tells him the room is his bedroom, not a library, explaining that he surrounds himself with books because they relax him. Lynx realizes Brufston is an intellectual and wonders if he's also part of Rick's party. He asks Brufston if he has read all the books in the room and Brufston tells him he has read most. He explains that he is having difficulty catching up on recent books because he has been focused on training Rick. Lynx is surprised the orc is heading Rick's training and he asks Brufston to instruct him just as he did Rick. Brufston obliges his request after noticing Lynx's eyes are glowing with passion, just like Rick's. Meanwhile, Rick is searching for Lynx and Mizet informs him that he went with Brufston for training in the woods. Rick, shocked and wonders why he would subject himself to such a cruel fate. Lynx is undergoing such a strenuous training session that he says his last prayers, hoping his wife and kids remain well in his absence. He is saved by Rionette, who is taking a huge hog back to the castle as their dinners. Lynx thanks her for saving his life and Rionette recognizes that he has been training with Brufston because he had some weight attached to his legs. He recounts how Brufston pushed him off the cliff after telling him to run down the slope with the weights attached. Lynx knows he wouldn't have survived if Rionette wasn't there and Rionette confirms his statement, informing him that Brufston was the cause of Rick's trauma. Brufston suddenly appears, cutting their conversation short and drags off Lynx to continue his training. After the training session, Lynx is glad to be alive, but Rick is pissed at him for throwing caution to the wind. Lynx explains that he only took Brufston's offer because he promised to go easy on him, but Rick tells him never to believe such lies. Mizet expresses his displeasure with Rick for exaggerating things and Brufston backs him up because he could easily revive Lynx if he gets hurt. Rick is surprised by how little a human life means to them. Alysseret is eager to play with Lynx, but Rick tells her off because she would turn him to dust. Mizet points fingers at Rick for inviting Lynx to the castle despite knowing the outcome of his visit and Rick kicks himself for that. They return to the castle and Rionette pours some tea for Lynx and Rick, telling them to be patient while she makes dinner. She walks out of the room and Lynx expresses how incredible Rionette is. Rick agrees with him and Lynx wonders how far their relationship is. Rick tells him they aren't in a relationship because he's too old, but Lynx tells him they can be compatible because he's 20 years older than his wife, which surprises Rick. He convinces Rick by explaining that things will work out if they have feelings for each other. They gather at the dinner table having dinner and Lynx commends Rionette's meal. She appreciates his compliments and Rick tells Lynx to eat as much as he can manage. The others request seconds and extra drinks, so Rionette leaves the dinner table to bring more. Lynx tells Rick it is a good time to show his affection by giving Rionette a hand and immediately jumps out of his seat, running after her. Lynx asks the others about Rick's inherent skill and Brufston explains that Rick cannot control his skill because it is a special skill that can only be activated under special conditions. Mizet points out that Rick would be overpowered if he could control his skill. Brufston informs Lynx that Rick is on an S-rank level without weapons or skills, but points out that he would surpass them if he could control his reckless soul skill, and Lynx is surprised that Rick could become so powerful. Brufston questions Lynx about the 6 grand orb magic crystals because he works at the capital. Lynx recognizes the name as the orbs mentioned in the Legend of Yamato. Brufston explains that the orbs are key to opening the door connected to the spiral region, where Kaiser Alsapiad inhabits and they needed to defeat him. Mizet informs Lynx that the orbs should be emitting strong mana because they are in the season of their activation, which occurs every 200 years. Rick asks Lynx if he has heard rumors of such a thing, but Lynx thought the legend was all fairy tale previously. He now realizes it's a true story because Rick's party want to take down Kaiser El Sapient. He tells Rick he hasn't heard anything about the orbs, but promises to check with the secret intelligence handles non-public quests. Rick secretly asks Lynx for more relationship advice after he couldn't assist Rionette because she handled everything perfectly. Ray, a new adventurer, is cleaning up the guild with a long face because she wants to be out on the field instead of being restricted to guild chores. She practices her skills with the broom to take down invincible foes when a conversation from the reception draws her attention. She heads out to see Rick, Elisarette, and Brufston standing before the Guildmaster. They request a special quest which the Guildmaster doesn't grant it to them, so they try to convince him they can handle it. Though the Guildmaster is convinced of their skills, he tells them their party doesn't meet the requirements of having 2 A-ranked adventurers in a 4-man party. Rick suggests they hire a temporary member, and the Guildmaster immediately offers up Ray because she always wanted to go on a dangerous mission. Though Ray always wanted to go on a dangerous mission, she wasn't enthusiastic about teaming up with the talking orc. The Guildmaster calls her to order, telling her to be respectful to the party because they are high-level adventurers. All Rays is a party consisting of a talking orc, an old man, and a pampered child, but team up with them regardless. They head out for the quest, and Elisarette informs the party that she is detecting something ahead. Ray asks Rick what they are searching for, and he tells her they are searching for some orbs around that area. She wonders if the orbs are worth anything, and Rick tells her they are too dangerous to be left alone because they attract monsters. She tries to convince Rick that she can solo any monster, despite being only an F-rank adventurer, as she aims to become an A-rank adventurer. Her dream inspires Rick, who decides to work hard to increase his rank. Ray asks about his current rank, and he tells her he was recently promoted to E rank. She writes them off as a late bloomer that she would outrank soon. Elisarette points out to a light source ahead, and they head towards the source. Meanwhile, Rionette is worried about Rick and Elisarette. Mizet assured her they will be fine because Brufston accompanied them. He decides to test out a gadget which produces wine without mana on Rionette's clothes, but she destroys the machine after catching him red-handed. They arrive at the location of the light source, where they see a wyvern having a meal. Ray is so freaked out that she hides behind the group because she knows the monster is dangerous. Brufston approaches the monster and she wonders if he has a plan to defeat it, but Brufston casually punches it out of the way, telling her he plans to beat up the monster. Ray pleads with him to find a new plan because he could attract more other wyverns from the nest if he hurts the current one. He tells her he didn't take down the first wyvern because he wants more to attack. Ray complains about the party because they love dangerous situations unnecessarily. Brufston is at his wit's end because she's so loud, so he tells Rick to take care of her. Rick leads her away as she keeps complaining that Rick put her in great danger. Rick teases her about her strengths, but she tells him she was talking about her future. A defeated wyvern suddenly lands beside them to the surprise of Ray because she can't believe the others sent the monsters flying from their location. Rick quickly moves her out of the way as a red wyvern lands ahead of them. Ray is scared because the monster is so strong it would give an A-rank adventurers a run for their money. Ray advises Rick to run, but Rick tells her to run while he tries something out on the dragon. She suddenly garners courage and tells Rick she will also stand and fight. Rick tries to dissuade her, but she tells him she won't leave him behind because they are party members, albeit temporarily. She offers to support Rick, but he takes down the dragon with a single blow. Rick is now confident of his strength, but Ray is so surprised she doesn't understand why Rick advised her to run to safety. Ray returned to the guild the next day, and the guildmaster commends her for doing a good job the previous day. He notices that she is blanked out and he wonders why. She apologizes to him because she experienced a lot the previous day, which draws his sympathy. He knows the members of the Orihalcon Fist always leave an impression. She recalls when she parted ways with Rick and his companions. They were taking home a wide-range corpse, and she wondered what they would do with it. They told her it was for dinner, and she was surprised because we didn't know wyvern were edible. The guildmaster explains that the party members are special because they are all S-rank adventurers. Ray is eager to become an S-rank adventurer, so she hands the broom to the guildmaster and bolts out the door. Meanwhile, Brufston presents the red flower, one of the 6 grand orbs, to the other party members. He informs them they can locate the other orbs if they resonate the red flower with mana. Mizet tests out his theory using his world mapping magic, which reveals the orb is in Heractopia, a country famous for its love for combat sports and home to the Colosseum. 400 years ago, when a land mostly comprised of desert, a king named Alexander Heractopia built the Colosseum where strong fighters could gather and face each other in battle. The king himself also participated in battles, and over the years he became the undefeated champion with 10,000 victories and no losses. The popularity of the Colosseum gave rise to the kingdom of Heractopia, and now the king Alexander Heractopia is immortalized as the kingdom's founder. Bruston wishes he could have gotten to spar with Alexander at least once before he died, but if that happened, the whole kingdom would likely be blown away in the process, and Heractopia being a fighter is a popular profession. But while Bruston would love to learn more about this place, he thinks it would be a good idea to start looking for the item they came here for. The others agree, so they all start looking around together, but whenever they try to ask someone for information, the person gets scared because of Bruston and runs away. They aren't going to make any progress like this, so Rick suggests that they could go to Town Hall instead to see if they can find some useful info there. However, just as they are about to leave and notice a girl being harassed by a guy she wants nothing to do with, so Rick is about to step in, but Bruston cuts him off and walks up to the guy instead. The guy is at least brave enough to stand his ground, but he seriously messes up when he challenges Bruston to a fight. Bruston is always down for a good round of violence, so he walks into a dark alley, and as soon as they are out of sight, the distinct sound of a skull cracking is heard and Bruston walks back out with the guy's limp body. The guy managed to survive somehow, and having such a near-death experience seems to have knocked the scumbag right out of him, so he's now an upstanding citizen. Introduces himself as Gold. The girl also introduces herself as Militia. Bruston says he has something he would like to ask both of them. He takes out the red jewel and asks if they have any idea if there's something like this in town. Gold says he has seen something similar before, but he doesn't remember where. Militia also recognizes the jewel, but she's having a hard time recalling where she's seen it before. Just then, a loud parade for the Shears fighting tournament passes by, and both Militia and Gold are excited about it. There are apparently only 2 more months before the King of Fists tournament officially begins, but Rionette doesn't know anything about it. Gold explains that it is a tournament to decide the champion of all fighters, and it's so popular that they get over 500,000 spectators each year. The parade is being led by the 5-time champion of the King of Fists tournament, Kerwin Erwolf, and he is quite popular for his strength, so everyone here adores him. While watching their idol go by in the parade, Militia and Gold take a look at his belt, and that's when they notice that Kerwin's champion belt has the jewel Rick and the others were looking for. Kerwin heads back to the gym where he trains after greeting all his fans, and once inside he takes a seat to relax a little. The owner of the gym comes over to Kerwin and apologizes for making him do all these publicity stunts, but Kerwin understands that it is important to build up hype for the tournament ahead of time. He also asked how Kerwin is feeling. While he doesn't feel bad, he doesn't feel great either. Things have gotten pretty boring for him since he always wins tournament without much of a challenge, so for once he would like to meet a worthy opponent. Just then, Rick and Rionette walk in, and Kerwin can immediately tell that these guys are different from all the other fighters he has seen before. The gym owner tells him it's bad manners for them to come in here uninvited even if they are fans, so Rick apologizes for barging in here unannounced, but he clarifies that they aren't here because they are fans of Kerwin. They are actually adventurers who came here in search of a particular gem. Rick is about to explain the whole story behind the gem, but then Bruston comes in and cuts things short. He isn't the kind of guy to waste time with a lot of words, so he tells Kerwin straight up that he wants that belt. The manager now thinks Bruston and the others are thieves who came to steal the belt, but Bruston clarifies that they didn't come to steal a belt. They are specifically after the jewel in the belt because it belonged to a former member of their party a long time ago and they need it for something important, but of course, he will have a perfect replacement gem made so they can put that in the belt instead. The owner thinks Bruston is lying, so he starts calling for someone from the gym to come over and kick these crazy people out. However, Kerwin tells them there's no need for that. He has a very unique nose, so he can smell when someone is lying, and Bruston doesn't kill off the scent of a liar. But while he may believe that Bruston's party is the original owner of the gym, he still can't just hand it over to him because this belt is the pride of Heractopia. The only way Bruston will be getting his hands on this belt is if he becomes the new champion of the tournament, and Bruston thinks that's a reasonable condition, so he turns around to leave. Rick begins asking if Bruston's seriously going to leave without the jewel, but Bruston is fine with it, since it just has to win the tournament to get what he wants. They all leave and the owner starts complaining about how rude those people were, but if Kerwin has let the owner try and kick them out like he wanted to, they would have gotten into a fight that would have killed everyone in this gym. The owner breaks out in a cold sweat over Kerwin's statement. He knew that they didn't look like average people, but he never would have guessed they were that strong. Kerwin states that for how the maid carried herself, he can tell that she's a wide array of lethal skills. Then there's the normal-looking man, but while he seems unremarkable, Kerwin can tell that he's trained his body to an inhuman degree, so he isn't one to be messed with. Finally then Brufston, and by every indication, he's the most interesting. Meanwhile, outside, Brufston explains to Rick and Rionette that he thinks they should all join the tournament as fighters so they can win the belt fair and square. In order to enter the tournament, one must first pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom, after which they need to win another match among those who qualified from the preliminaries, and that's when they are finally allowed to participate in the tournament. Brufston says he will apply through the eastern gate while Rick and Rionette can enter through the western gate, so they'll all be in different tournament brackets. Rick and Rionette are fine with the plan, but they asked Brufston if he will be really okay getting around town by himself, but there's no need to worry since Brufston already got Gold to agree to guide him around town. In order to register for the preliminaries, Rick and Rionette are going to need to pass a test first, which is a lot like the promotion exams at the Adventurers Guild. As Rick enters the arena for his test, was informed that he will be required to fight a mock battle to gauge his strength. His opponent will be one of the newly recruited fighters from the previous batch. Rick asked if his opponent is going to be strong, so the examiner checks the forms and tells him that the girl he's going to be fighting has won every match up till now, but whether Rick wins or loses, he will still pass the exam as long as he meets certain criteria. All of a sudden, the doors swing wide open and a very familiar voice begins to introduce herself. She confidently declares that because of her speed, people have started calling her the Flash, so whoever is up against her next has better watch out. However, her confidence goes down the drain completely as soon as she recognizes Rick. Angelica asked why Rick is here, but he could easily ask her the same question. He's also a bit worried about being Raster here since it would be awkward after what happened last time, but Angelica tells him that her siblings aren't here with her, so Rick doesn't have to worry. With that said, she knows how powerful Rick is, so it's terrible luck that she has to face him in a mock battle. Even if the loss won't really have any consequences, she has an undefeated streak going, so she would like to keep it going. To do this, she decides to go all out from the start against Rick in hopes of overwhelming him with her speed, but as she tries to attack, she falls flat on the ground. She thinks she must have tripped since she's so nervous, so she gets back up and prepares to dash at Rick again. However, the same thing happens, so she realizes that she isn't fallen because she is nervous, she's falling because Rick is doing something. Rick looks down Angelica and asks her what she thinks of the new skill he's been practicing over the last few months. After realizing how strong he had gotten, Rick didn't want to risk hurting the people around him if he ever got into a fight, so he developed the 8 secret arts of going easy, and right now he's using the first art, which is basically constant leg sweeps. This is really effective because leg sweeps demoralize and incapacitate opponents as they fail to get up. It barely does any damage. Angelica thinks it's insulting, but Rick points out that she hasn't been hurt because of the leg sweeps. Even if Frank is only doing leg sweeps, he's doing them at a speed that Angelica can't keep track of. Even with her exceptional speed, it would normally be impossible to pull something like that off, but after the stuff she has seen Rick do, she isn't surprised that he can manage it. She thinks the best course of action would be to keep her distance from Rick, but as she tries to back away, she still gets her legs scrubbed again. She still isn't willing to give up yet, and Rick is impressed by her will to keep going, so he says he will fight her seriously from now on. But as soon as he said that, Angelica gave up because she's not stupid. Rick is a little disappointed that things ended so abruptly, but his victory means he is now recognized as a fighter and can compete in the preliminaries. However, before he can head over to register for the preliminaries, Angelica comes running up and asks him one more time why he had to come here. She starts crying because it's not fair how Rick pounds her into submission all the time. While how she phrased it, Rick is worried that Rionette might misunderstand, so he suggests they all get something to eat so they can talk things out. They later go to a restaurant, and just so happens that Melicia's parents own the place, so she's happy to hook Rick and Rionette up with some freebies. Rick tells her he appreciates it, but before she leaves she asks if Brufston will be coming here as well because she kinda has a thing for him. Unfortunately, Rick tells her that Brufston is registering on the eastern side of town, so they won't be seeing him for a while. Melicia is a bit disappointed, so she leaves, and once the three are alone, Angelica asks Rick why he decided to come here. Rick says he is thinking about winning the tournament, and Angelica can't believe he's talking about winning the tournament so casually. Rick then asked her why she came here since he didn't think that knight like her would be willing to give up on her sword and fight with her fist. Angelica says she has her reasons for wanting to be here, and Rick asks if she plans on entering the tournament, to which she answers yes, since she will be participating. Rick feels motivated to give it his all in the tournament as well, but this surprises her, since she thought Rick was planning to compete in next year's tournament. She tells him that in order to qualify for the preliminaries, he need to have won at least 40 matches against other random fighters, and it's a very exhausting process, so most people average about 10 matches per month. With that said, there's only a week left before the preliminary start, so there's no way Rick will have enough time to fight all those matches without getting exhausted, but Rick tells her that he already requested 10 matches per day for the next 4 days. The next day, Rick heads to the arena to begin his series of matches, and his first opponent is a guy called Grit, but the coordinator warns Rick that Grit is rumored to be cheating by using a weapon, although they never manage to prove it. In the arena, Rick comes face to face with Grit, and the guy looks really shady, but Rick can't see any weapons, so he's sure he will be fine. As the match is set to begin, Grit pulls out an impact stone he had hidden in his shoe. Impact stones increase the power of a punch dozens of times over, so when Grit punches Rick, a giant dust cloud is kicked up, but by the time things settle down, the only one injured is Grit, who now has 2 new elbows. Grit doesn't understand what went wrong since he was able to shatter boulders easily with the impact stone, but now that he has had his turn, Rick gets ready to attack using his secret art of going easy, so he throws a punch and missed his intentionally so that the air force from the punch would knock him out instead, and this way, Grit won't suffer any fatal injuries. Everyone is left in shock at what they just witnessed, but with that, Rick's first match come to an end, and it looks like the Terminal of Fists is going to be a real sight to behold this year. The story continues. We see Rick and Rionette later go to watch one of Angelica's matches, and Angelica lives up to her title The Flash by swiftly defeating her opponent after kicking him straight into a wall. After the match, Rick and Rionette congratulate her for successfully winning her 40th match, meaning she has officially met the requirements for a qualified the preliminaries. Seeing her complete her matches motivates Rick even more to do well in all his matches, but Angelica still can't wrap her head around the fact that Rick wants to complete 40 matches in the span of 4 days. Rick still doesn't see what's so difficult about it, so Angelica points out that he were only allowed to register for 1 match per day in given venue, and while there are more than 10 venues in Heractopia, some of them are really remote, even as far as 100 kilometers from any other venues, so traveling between venues and time for his matches should be practically impossible. However, Rick cuts off Angelica's explanation because he says he has a match over at the Green Hill venue soon. Angelica yells that there's no way he's going to make it there in time because that venue is over 30 kilometers away, even if the fastest carriage won't be able to make it there in time, but Rick never said anything about taking the carriage. He's in a hurry here, so it's faster for him to just run. Angelica thinks that's a crazy idea, but as Rick takes a step and disappears into a dust cloud from his speed, she realizes that she doesn't deserve to be called the Flash anymore. Rick is this fast. While she's still coping with the loss of her identity, Rionette asked Angelica if she would like to go watch Rick's match. In short, she definitely wants to, but in his speed there's no way Angelica could keep up with Rick. If that's the case, then Rionette offers to take her there instead, but Angelica is hesitant to agree since she has a bad feeling about this. However, before she can give a response, Rionette has already picked her up and begins jumping from roof to roof at high speed. Angelica pleads with Rionette to go back to the ground, but Rionette doesn't want to take the roads since they're annoyingly complicated. Angelica eventually made it to the arena to watch Rick's fight, but she was so busy barfing that she missed the whole thing. Rick says he messed up on that fight since he still needs a bit of practice with making his attacks non-lethal, but he will have to practice later because for now he has to get to his next venue, and runs off. Angelica doesn't want to go through the terror of being carried by Rionette again, so she tries to back out of it, but Rionette has already grabbed her and is hopping through town again. Rick continues to win his matches effortlessly across town, and Angelica suffers severe motion sickness from being carried everywhere by Rionette. Eventually the 4 days are up and Rick has officially qualified for the preliminaries by winning all 40 of his matches, so the next step is the leagues. Angelica is really glad that she isn't in the same bracket as Rick, so she won't have to fight him for now. Rionette asks Angelica if she was hoping to win the tournament, and yes, Angelica would have liked to win since she's participating anyway, but if Rick is in the tournament, then her chances of winning are basically zero. On top of that, Brufston is also participating in the tournament, and while Angelica has never met him, Rionette mentions that he's the one that trained Rick, so Angelica knows Brufston must be even more monstrous than Rick is, but even whining is impossible for her. Maybe she could still get that guy leave her alone by participating. Rionette asks what guy she's referring to, but Angelica doesn't want to explain, so she changes the subject and asks Rionette where Rick went. Rionette tells her that Rick went on a light 600-kilometer jog, but Angelica is no longer surprised by the absurd things Rick does. She asked Rionette how she could stand accompanying Rick all the time, but it has never once bothered Rionette. In fact, she kind of enjoys it. Angelica points out that at some point people are going to start rumors that she and Rick are lovers, but again Rionette wouldn't mind that one bit. This really does have feelings for Rick. Angelica is shocked by how bluntly Rionette just said that, but a moment later a guy comes up to them and says he has a request for the two beautiful ladies. Angelica thinks the guy is hitting on them, but in reality he's pleading with him because he's short-staffed and needs some part-time workers. Later that day, Rick is back from his jog and he's approached by a man named Snape, who is the chairman of the West League. Rick asked how Snape knows him, but it turns out that Rick has become pretty famous around here for being the fastest man to ever qualify in the West League. Snape shakes hands with Rick, and as he does, his guard comes out of the bar and informs him that Angelica isn't here. Snape is disappointed to hear this, so Rick asked him if he knows Angelica. Snape confers that he and Angelica are quite close, but he is just a merchant who is on good terms with the Diarmuid family. Changing topics, Rick asks Snape when he retired from being a fighter, but Snape is shocked that Rick knows he used to be a fighter since he never mentioned it. Rick explains that when they shook hands, he could tell that Snape's hands are those of a trained fighter. Snape admits that he did once win a small tournament and the cheers of the crowd were like nothing has ever experienced before, but that was 20 years ago, and he has long retired since then, so that was his first and last victory. He's really excited when it comes to fighting, and in fact, his company is sending a fighter to the tournament this year, but he has other business to attend to, so he's going to have to cut the conversation short. Snape bids farewell to Rick, but before he goes, he also asked Rick to tell Angelica he came looking for her, and then she shouldn't play around too much since Snape wants her to take good care of her body. While Snape leaves, Rick heads inside and Militia comes over, asking him if everything is alright. She saw her outside talking with Snape, and while it's good that nothing happened and she wants me to be careful, he may look like a gentleman, but rumors are going around that Snape is part of the criminal underworld, and Rick is surprised to hear that since Snape is connected to Angelica's family. It was a total shock when Snape's company became the major sponsor for this year's tournament, and as the sponsor he has a free sponsor slot to send anyone he wishes to the tournament. Just then, Rick hears some guys in the bar talking about how pretty the bunny girls outside are, and as soon as they mention that there's a dark elf bunny girl, Rick has a feeling he's going to want to see this. We cut to the front of the West League Stadium where Angelica and Rionette are volunteering at the advertising bunny girls. Angelica is really getting into it, but she's not doing it because she wants to. She just couldn't bring herself to deny the man's request when he was so desperate, but Rionette says the only reason she's doing this is because Angelica agreed to do it too. The jobs are not too bad, but there are always going to be drunk idiots who don't know when to quit, and this guy seems to really enjoy harassing the bunny girls until they run away. But when he tries to grab Angelica's chest, first off there's not much to grab, but he also receives a horrible beating from her. While she's still angling something on his head, Rick walks up and he's shocked when he sees Angelica in the bunny outfit. Angelica is embarrassed and tries explaining she's just doing this to help out a little, but Rick stops paying attention to her as soon as he spots Rionette. And you can literally see the sparks flying, but Angelica is just standing in the middle of it. Meanwhile, Kerwin's coach is reading the newspaper and he sees an article about Brufston and how he completed all his qualification matches in the span of 2 days. Kerwin comments that Rick seems pretty tame compared to the ogre, but he still managed to finish all his matches in 4 days, so he's really excited for this year's fight. The coach thinks back to the time when he went to a rundown city in search of new talent. He walked into a bar and found Kerwin having taken down an entire gang or after him. Back then, Kerwin was known as the hungry wolf of the slums, and he asked the coach if he was here to try and take him down, but on the contrary, the coach was here to offer him the opportunity a lifetime. He said he wanted to scout Kerwin as a fighter for Heractopia, and with his strength, he will be able to acquire anything he wants by winning fights. There are also going to be plenty of strong fighters there keep him busy, and as soon as he heard that Kerwin was convinced, it has been a while since he has been this excited for a fight. The next day, the leagues are about to begin, and only one person from each block can advance to the tournament, so they are in for several fierce battles. The first fighter, Block A, is between Angelica and a fighter named Helen, and as the fight begins, Angelica seems to be straining herself a lot more than she usually would, which is out of character for her. She eventually wins her match by kicking Helen into the wall, but she's already starting to get winded. Next up is Rick's match, and his opponent begins charging up his special move, but Rick just chops him across the neck and knocks him out. The rest of the match is pretty much in the same way, with Angelica coming out on top after his struggle and Rick effortlessly annihilating the competition. So far Angelica has been on a roll with her victories, but if she wants to guarantee that she can make it to the tournament, then she can't afford to lose in this single match. Rick encourages her to do her best, but as he is about to give her some advice about her next fight, she walks off before he can say anything. Angelica's next match begins, and she's up against a tank, so while she's still faster than him, her attacks are a lot less effective. She tries to make up for this by incorporating magic into her attack, so she creates a water prison around him and fires a bolt of lightning into it, but the big guy is still standing after it all. He mocks Angelica for not being able to take him down and asks if she's running out of steam already. Angelica tries to dash in with Blink Step, but she has indeed run out of stamina, so the big guy is able to outpace her and Angelica gets knocked out because of it. After Angelica's match is over, she gets treated with healing magic in the infirmary, but as she leaves, Rick is waiting for her outside to see how she's doing. Angelica doesn't want to talk, but Rick points out that she was being too hasty in that fight. It's true that her opponent had amazing defenses, so it was a bad matchup for her from the start, but Angelica could have still won if she switched tactics instead of continuing to use moves that would drain her stamina. Angelica doesn't want to hear it, but Rick keeps following her because he can tell that there's something on her mind and he wants to hear her out if it will help. Angelica eventually caves in and says we'll tell Rick all about her situation. It all started when her parents died, leaving her and her siblings in charge of running the Dire Mood estate. Of course, at the time they were all still children, so they quickly fell into financial ruin. However, their scheming grandpa went and made a deal with a man known as Snape in exchange for significant amount of financial support, and in exchange he agreed to have Angelica engage Snape as a way for Snape to have a connection to the nobility. After that, Angelica and her siblings did everything they could to restore the Dire Mood family so they wouldn't have to rely on Snape, but by then it was already too late to call off the engagement. That is a really complicated situation, but Rick still hasn't gotten over the fact that Angelica is engaged. In any case, Angelica tried to investigate Snape to see if she can find enough dirt on him to call off the engagement, but what she found instead was that Snape had become a sponsor for this tournament, and with him being the sponsor, he's been allowed to insert a fighter and he's choosing into the tournament. Just then, they hear commotion in the bar nearby, so they go over to check it out, and they find the guy that defeated Angelica arguing with the lizard man. He's telling the lizard man let go of the waitress that he's holding by the neck, but the lizard man refuses, so Taylor tries to knock him out and save the woman. However, the lizard man is too powerful and eats that punch before knocking Taylor out instead. Geese mocks Taylor for thinking he could win when he is so weak, and after that he goes back to harassing the waitress, but Angelica runs up and yells for him to stop. She knows she stands no chance against Geese, but she can't just sit back and let him do whatever he wants. Geese is offended that another weakling would dare to stand in his way, so he's about to punch Angelica in the face, but Rick catches his arm and tells him to calm down. Geese is about to start a fight here, but Snape suddenly shows up and tells him to quiet down and leave. Geese does as he is told, and Snape apologizes for all the trouble he has caused. Geese is Snape's younger brother and has serious anger management issues, but there has been no one strong enough to put him in check lately, although he does calm down pretty quickly as Snape tells him to. After Snape leaves, Angelica explains that Snape put a lot of money into the engagement deal, so he became a sponsor of the tournament in order to recoup some of this money. And to do that, he plans to take advantage of the gambling rings surrounding the tournament and use his sponsor slot fighter to guarantee the results of the matches so he can win a lot of money. That's why Angelica entered in the first place, in order to take out Snape's fighter and force him to call off the engagement, but as much as she needs to admit, she knows there's no way she can defeat Geese as she's now. Rick thinks about it for a second, and then he asks Angelica if she would like him to train her, but given the kind of training Rick went through, that sounds more like a death threat to her. The story continues. We see before they begin their training, Rick warns Angelica that she's about to undergo the most brutal training she has ever experienced. She tells him she's ready, impressing him with her determination. Rick straps some weights to her ankles and arms and asks her to begin with a 30-kilometer run. She asks him to explain the training routine, but Rick warns her not to forget her physical enhancement spell, or she may not make it through the course. He attaches himself to her with a rope and kicks off running, with Angelica being dragged behind like a rag doll. Rick continues dragging Angelica along as she wonders what kind of punishment he's subjecting her to. Rick explains that her body will adapt to fast movement if she gets pulled by someone faster than her, explaining that she needs more balance to boost her flickering feet ability. Angelica begs Rick to stop so she can take a break, but he takes that as a cue to turn things up. He assures her their training will soon end because she only has to keep up with him for 6 more hours. Their training session eventually ends with Angelica sprawled helplessly on the ground, seeing visions of her parents calling out to her from another world. Rick is impressed that she survived the training session, but Angelica is more concerned about her legs, wondering if they are still attached or got lost on the way. Rick recounts his training experience with Rionette, telling Angelica that he was unconscious the first time she trained him that way. Angelica is glad that she survived her first day of training, unlike Rick, who had been revived 3 times, but Rick tells her they would continue after her lunch break because it's just noon. Angelica is heartbroken by the news, begging Rick to end the torture, but Rick just locks off, telling her he would return in an hour. Angelica wonders why Rick occasionally becomes deaf whenever it suits him. Angelica goes to a cafe where she has lunch. She isn't planning to continue her training because Rick was torturing her instead of training her, which isn't what she signed up for. She has internal conflict about her decision, but convinces herself she is retreating tactfully to protect herself instead of chickening out and running away. She's certain that Rick won't find her in her sanctuary, but Rick suddenly walks into view, surprised that there's a cafe in the middle of nowhere. He's surprised Angelica is in the cafe because he has been looking for her everywhere. Angelica is disappointed in her hiding skills because Rick found her 15 minutes after she ran away. Rick orders a cup of tea, but Angelica is getting impatient with his good guy attitude. She assumes he is at the cafe to scold her, so she tells him to get it over with, but he tells her she's mistaken because he relates to her situation. He tells her how he ran away dozens of times during his training, recalling how he couldn't even escape to the afterlife because Brufston always revised him, depriving him of his isekai. Rick tells Angelica he got used to losing his life multiple times, and Angelica is impressed that he was able to put up with such a bizarre training condition for 2 years. Rick tells her how Brufston convinced him to keep at it because he told him his regret will be greater than his current suffering if he quit. Rick decided to see the training through after thinking deeply about what Brufston said. Angelica is motivated because Rick is a walking testimony of the brutal training method. Rick tells her that Brufston always gave him the choice to walk away, which made him feel better about the training routine. Angelica tells Rick she has always hated noble traditions, recounting how she has been trained as a noble from birth. Though they taught her many things, she realized she wasn't suited to be a noble. She tells Rick she wants to contribute to her family as a fighter instead of a noble because she dreams of becoming the first special class female knight. Angelica is now more motivated because she's certain the scale is tipping in her favor, just like it did for Rick after his training. She follows Rick back to training, where Rick asks her about her fighting style, confirming that it's an arrangement of the Knight's Order's swordsmanship. Rick is certain that she would become stronger if she fights with a sword, but she reminds him about the tournament rule prohibiting weapons during a duel. Rick tells her his idea of turning herself into a weapon by modifying her hand to become a sword. Rick introduces Rionette as her special instructor to help with her new training, and Rionette walks up, eager to begin their training. The next day at the arena, Angelica faces off against a new opponent named Silva. The commentator announces the matchup, telling spectators that whoever wins qualifies for the next round. Angelica looks feral, surprising her fan. The old spectator's friend, who wants to witness her in her glorious nobility. The old spectator tells his friend her fighting style change was warranted because it wouldn't have worked against Silva. The commentator signals for the start of the match, and Angelica promptly knocks out her opponent with a single strike. The commentator announces her as the winner, and Rionette is satisfied with the result of their training session. Angelica continues to struggle with the refs because she hasn't recovered from the trauma she was subjected to during training. After the match, Angelica returns to the inn, having a crisis. She was bothered by the side glances she got from the citizens of Heractopia. She wonders what she did in her match to warrant their cautious gaze, but Rick assures her that it was worth it because she won her match, which secured her a spot in the tournament. Rionette assures her that even the citizens are aware of how dangerous he is now, and Angelica is surprised, because that isn't the impression she wants to give off. Elisarette walks into the inn with Mizet, and Rionette wonders if they found any of the 6 orbs in the Empire. Mizet tells her their mission was a burst, and Rick is disappointed they wasted their efforts for a fruitless journey. Mizet tries to flirt with Militia, but she gives him a cold shoulder. Gold walks into the inn with Brufston, and Militia is flattered to the surprise of Mizet. They have dinner together, and Mizet asks Brufston about his side of the tournament. Bruston is confident they will get the orb because they will win the tournament. Alysseret expresses interest in the tournament, but Rick tells her it would be a disaster because she will blow the arena away easily. Bruston asks Angelica if she's participating in the tournament and she tells him she's taking part in it, adding that Rick is training her, which surprises him. Rick praises her for being a quick learner, but she doesn't fancy her chances in the tournament because she doesn't have enough time to train. Bruston assures her she'll be fine because her efforts will pay off. Everyone else joins Bruston to encourage Angelica, and her spirits are immediately lifted as Rick tells her to show everyone the full result of their training the next day. The main tournament kicks off with the arena filled to the brim with spectators cheering at the top of their lungs. The announcer introduces the fighters who made it through the qualifiers and announces the first matchup between Geese and Herman. She introduces Geese as the sponsored fighter from Dragonaut Company, the company owned by Snape. She announces the second matchup between Angelica and Doug and the third between Rick and Serena. Rick thanked his lucky stars that he wasn't matched up with Bruston because he would have forfeited his match. The announcer announces the fifth matchup between Donnie and Bruston, and the eighth between Eddie and Kerwin. Kerwin's trainer is certain of his victory despite his condition. The announcer announces the other matchups for the first round, telling the spectators they can place their bets. Angelica points out to Rick that Geese was put in the easy tournament bracket, so he doesn't match up with Bruston or Kerwin. She explains that it's a match-fixing strategy by Snape to make Geese look unbeatable, so Snape can bet on his opponent when the odds against him are astronomical. Rick now understands why they don't want Geese facing a tough opponent, but Angelica promises to port their plans because she will be matched with Peace in the second round. Rick wonders what she would have done if she met him in the final, but Angelica assures him that she will match up against Geese before then. Bruston and Rick step out of the arena, but they are stopped by Kerwin, who expresses surprise to see them at the tournament. Bruston reminds him of their commitment to take the belt from him, and Kerwin looks forward to their attempt to dethrone him as the reigning champion. Bruston walks off and assuring Kerwin they will inevitably meet in the semis. Kerwin's trainer notices Kerwin is thrilled by the challenge because it reminds him of the first time Kerwin stepped into his gym. Back then, his trainer told him about one of the gym members who had reached the top 4 in the tournament, making him eager to spar with him. The trainer set up a sparring match between Kerwin and Garen, the top 4 challenger, but Kerwin was eager to take down the top 4 challenger. His trainer warned him it was prohibited to finish a challenger off. He also told Kerwin weapons and armor were prohibited in the tournament. Kerwin was satisfied with the rules and eager to take down Garen, but Garen won the match. Though he lost, his trainer was impressed by his display despite being untrained. He was certain Kerwin would become the greatest fighter with some training. After losing his first match, Kerwin's attitude changed. He trained harder, yearning for victory against Garen so he could lose to someone stronger and train even harder. Those were the kind of fights Kerwin was looking for. Kerwin eventually won his first tournament after taking out his opponent easily in the finals to be crowned the champion of the King of Fists tournament. It was 6 years ago since he first won the tournament, but his trainer could see a gleam in his eyes similar to the one he saw when he won it. The match between Geese and Herman kicks off, but Geese gets bored as Herman lands baby punches in him. Herman asks him to take their fight seriously as he continues landing his baby lunches, but Geese is unaffected by it. Geese waves him off with a single swing, but Herman regains his feet and continues landing his baby punches. Geese gets annoyed by his persistence and lashes out. Herman tries to get out of the way in time, but Geese accidentally hits him, knocking him out. Geese is announced as the victor, but walks away because he's annoyed by the spectators' cheers. Angelica acknowledges his strength, but Rick points out that something is not right with Geese because he has the movement of an amateur despite being so strong. Angelica tells him it doesn't matter because Geese already gave the crowd the impression that he's strong. Angelica, Rick, and Bruston win their matches, proceeding to the next round. The last match of the first round between Eddie and Kerwin kicks off, and the spectators are eager to observe the spectacle. Bruston and Rick are also eager to see what Kerwin is made of. Eddie tries a feint, but Kerwin reads his movements and knocks him down. Rick figured out that Kerwin already knew Eddie's plan of attack, as Bruston explained that he could perceive his opponent's movement using his sense of smell. Bruston is impressed with his future sending, concluding that Kerwin is strong. An exclamation from the spectators draws their attention back to the match because Eddie knocked down Kerwin. Bruston is surprised that Kerwin, but Rionette explains that he let himself get hit on purpose. Kerwin gets back to his feet and Eddie rushes at him, trying to leave no room for recovery, but Kerwin brings him down with a huge strike, knocking him out. Kerwin is declared the winner and the announcer expresses excitement for the continuation of the tournament the next day. The next day, Rick and Rionette anticipate Angelica's match against Geese to see the impact of her training. Snape approaches Rick and takes permission to sit beside him to watch the match. Snape tries to act friendly towards Alyssarette, but she sees through his act and tells him to drop the pretense. Rick wonders why Snape isn't sitting with the other VIPs, and he tells Rick he wants to witness the match between his fiancée and his brother up close. Geese has a hangover from the previous night because he drank too much. Angelica stops him on his way into the arena, but he doesn't recognize her. She introduces herself as his opponent, which makes him recount Snape's warning telling him not to hurt her face so she looks good during their wedding. Angelica promises to show Geese the result of her training, but Geese laughs off her threat because he's sure her training will amount to nothing. He's certain that though he's never trained, he's still stronger than Angelica. Angelica doesn't believe he has never trained, but he tells her that he ended up with his build normally, assuring her that he has no reason to lie. Geese promises to take Angelica down, but his arrogance pisses her off so much so that she vows to put him in his place. Their match commences and Angelica uses her speed attacks, but they're ineffective against Geese. She removes her strengthening magic to the surprise of Snape, and Geese tells her to forfeit the match because the odds are against her. She uses her new Blink Step skill, combining it with her Thread Slicer ability to pierce through Geese's thick skin, leaving him stunned. The story continues. We see Snape is stunned because not even the sharpest sword could scratch Geese's skin. Rick and Rionette know better though, because this is what they taught Angelica. A look back shows when Rionette demonstrated the technique to Angelica. It's called Thread Slash, but Angelica thought that Rick was a psycho for wanting her to learn it. Rionette explained that it's not impossible, since Rick was able to learn it. Rick could never manage to be as precise as Rionette, so Rionette explained that Angelica just needs to feel the wind when she swings her arm. Angelica had a hard time grasping it, but she practiced more than she ever had. She eventually learned to incorporate her other abilities and reimagine the technique in her own style. It's a technique that releases magical energy stored within the body in a short and powerful burst. It takes a huge toll on the body, but the hellish training they put her through makes it seem like nothing to her. Angelica's flick her feet ability allows her to use the technique in a way that only she is capable of. Geese gets annoyed when she uses it again, and he nearly chops her in half. Snape is entertained as the two continue to battle it out, but Geese is done holding back. He sends Angelica flying into a wall and tells Snape that he can't resist doing whatever he wants to such a lively opponent. Angelica refuses to give up, but Geese has seen her flicker ability a bunch of times already, and he can now match her speed. He really hits her hard this time, and he mocks her for being mediocre trash. Rick becomes concerned for Angelica, but Snape is glad that he's finally realizing that Geese's strength is unmeasurable. Snape first met his adopted brother when Geese was 8 years old, and he would beat Snape so badly that he couldn't even stand. It turns out that Geese is the person that made Snape retire from fighting. Geese is a perfect prodigy born with every talent needed for combat. He is a true monster. Geese is also a real jerk because he continues to talk Angelica. He says that she is worthless trash and that will never change no matter how much training she does. He also piles on by insulting her parents. Snape knows that Angelica thinks he's trying to rig the match and have Geese lose, but Geese is crazy strong and there's no need for that. Instead, Snape has done the opposite. The odds of a sponsor/competitor winning are extremely low. Everyone bet against Geese, so Snape took those odds and he placed a large bet on Geese to win. The crowd then watches in horror as Geese begins to really beat up Angelica. It's a cruel beatdown and Rick determines that Angelica has reached her limit. Angelica is confident that Geese won't be able to beat her, but Geese is determined to see her break. He wants to make her realize that a piece of trash will never be able to train enough to beat a prodigy like him. Angelica doesn't want to regret anything like she talked to Rick about, and she tries it one last punch. This doesn't work out too well though, as it just makes Geese want to eliminate her even more. Rick tries to have the match stopped, but it's too late as Geese begins his final attack. Luckily for Angelica, something makes Geese miss. Her life is spared, but Geese is announced the winner. Geese sees that Rick was the one that tossed his shoe, but Rick is obviously furious. Angelica is taken away and Rick meets with Geese in the hallway. Geese is pretty upset about the interference, but he's surprised when Rick avoids his attack. Rick calmly explains that there's no need to hurry because he wants to defeat Geese in front of the entire crowd. Geese is furious, but he feels the same way. Rick goes on to win his next match, but Angelica's still in bad shape. Rick thinks about how hard she trained and he can't help but sympathize with her. Brufston defeats his opponent with just one strike like Rick did, and Kerwin shows off his immense power as well. This only leaves 4 competitors, and the semifinals will take place the next day. Rick finishes up some training and finds that Angelica has recovered, and he assumes that Brufston healed her, but he warns that any damage deep in the body will still remain. Something is very obviously bothering her, but Rick doesn't even notice, so she explains what's wrong. Rick trained her even though there was nothing in it for him, but she ended up failing. She apologized for wasting his time, and explains that she just wanted to prove that she could walk on her own 2 feet. Angelica convinces herself that marrying Snape won't be so bad, but Rick snaps her out of it. He says that he is the one that should be apologizing because he wasn't able to discern Geese's true strength before it was too late. Rick simply tells her to watch his next match closely, so she can see what lies beyond the training she went through. The semifinals finally begin and Rick is set to face Geese. Rick is surprised to hear that Geese wants to apologize to Angelica, but it turns out that he's only sorry that he didn't end her life. Now she has to endure living while being tormented by her lack of ability. The fight begins, so Geese starts taunting Rick, but Rick ends up crushing his face in. Rick has brought the prodigy to his knees, so he tells Geese to stop looking so pathetic. Geese thinks he's just getting too confident, but Rick rocks him again. Angelica shocked to see Rick's attacks working on Geese's iron body, but Rick has hardly used his strength at all. Rick is only using controlled attacks. The force of the blow doesn't land on the outside of the body, it bores its way inside. It doesn't matter how strong Geese's body is, if Rick's attacks with perfect timing he will do major damage. Rick gives Geese a chance to quit, but Geese uses strengthening magic instead. It's specifically for dragons, and it makes the match much more intense. It uses up a lot of magical energy, but that's no problem for Geese. Snape explains that Geese has never trained his magical capacity at all, he was just born with a ton of it. Rick is practically the opposite, so Geese tells him to blame his parents. Rick's next attack could stop by Geese's iron body, and Angelica's shocked to see that the lizard was able to learn the technique she was using. The crowd has gone quiet, so Geese assumes that everyone has gotten bored of watching a prodigy beat up an average person. Brufston, however, sees it differently. He explains that Rick doesn't care about the audience, he only cares about how Angelica sees him. Rick blocks another attack and he's pleased to see that Geese is finally showing some signs of fatigue. Geese is shocked because no matter how much he attacks, Rick never sheds a drop of blood. This is because Rick is using a special technique. It allows them to disperse attacks within his body, so he has hardly taken any damage at all. Geese is insulted because Rick is clearly holding back. Rick explains that he restricted his physical abilities to match Angelica's levels because winning this match isn't the only important thing, he also wants to show Angelica her own potential. Rick has turned this bout into sort of a virtual rematch between Geese and Angelica. This of course infuriates Geese, but Rick tells him to calm down and think about his next attack. Geese irons up his body for his next attack, but Rick just shatters his armor to pieces. Rick explains that Geese has never tried hard enough at anything, so getting this tired is new to him. Snape refuses to believe that Rick surpasses Geese in power, but Rick's team points out that Rick hardly has any ability at all. Rick started training after the time for training his magic reserves had passed, so technically he is less than average. Snape can't understand how he is able to surpass a prodigy like Geese, but Angelica has come to realize why. Rick tells Geese that he isn't used to being tired, so he is no longer able to retain his precision when attacking. Those who work hard continue to push themselves even through fatigue, they keep moving until they can't anymore. The strength a person has after they've exhausted themselves, is there a person's true strength? The brain-dead lizard tries to keep attacking, but it's no use. Rick says that true prodigies hone their skills by putting in a lot of effort, and he has seen this happen with his friends. Geese has always thought he was the strongest person alive, but in reality, he was only running into opponents he could beat. Geese really loses it after hearing this, so he uses the greatest of dragon or strengthening magics. There's practically turns him into a dragon, and Snape reveals that Geese has called on the ancient blood of the dragons. Rick has cut off guard by his power and he is shocked when his next punch does nothing to the beast. It's like Geese is made of metal and his attacks are a lot faster. Geese really lucked out being born with this powerful body, so Rick determines that he won't be able to win. Geese is glad that Rick has come to his senses, but what Rick actually meant was that someone at Angelica's current level can't beat the dragon. This doesn't mean that Angelica should give up, because she just needs to keep training the next time she needs to put her life on the line. Rick then starts adding a few months of training here and they're slowly increasing his own power. He releases 12 months worth of training and he becomes too fast to see. Angelica concedes that she isn't at this level yet, but she can see that Rick is using her flickering feed technique and the really advanced way. This makes her realize that this will be her strength if she continues the hellish training for another year. Rick has taken control of the fight, so he does some more lecturing. He explains that ordinary hard work can't overcome the difference and inborn abilities. It requires the madness to continue to exert extraordinary efforts. It's true that Angelica lost after training herself to death for an entire month, so he questions if she will be able to push herself to do that same hellish training for an entire year if it means she can win. Angelica reminds herself about what Rick said about the regret scale. She is inspired and declares that she was born with a scale to only ever tips in one direction. Rick knocks Geese on his behind and he wonders if the lizard has what it takes to push himself through this current struggle. Unfortunately, Geese hasn't learned a single thing, so Rick decides that he will just have to end the fight. Rick uses the thread slash he is in as precise as Angelica. The attack still manages to defeat Geese, but Rick tells him that he is lucky that he isn't facing the Angelica that will exist in a year. Rick and Angelica smiled at each other, and Rick has announced the winner. The story continues. We see Angelica is confident that she can reach the level that Rick showed her in 1 year, and Rick has declared the winner of his match. Snape is surprisingly calm, and it's because he's actually happy to see Geese get denied. Geese destroyed his life as a pugilist, so Snape doesn't feel bad for him at all. Snape has lost a lot of money after betting on Geese, and he won't be able to marry Angelica now. Angelica mocks him for it, but she's surprised when he nobly accepts defeat. It's finally time for the second match of the tournament that will have Brufston face Kerwin. Kerwin is a 3-time champion, but Brufston beat every opponent he fought with just one punch. Kerwin can instantly how much of a beast Brufston is because he's just standing there, but he still doesn't leave a single opening. The fight begins, so Kerwin starts with a barrage of punches, but the crowd cast in amazement as Brufston pushes him back. Kerwin becomes excited because Brufston is the strongest person he has ever faced, but everyone is horrified when Geese returns to the arena. His dragon blood has made him go crazy, so he goes on a rampage in the stands. The terrifying lizard goes to attack Kerwin, but Kerwin easily stops him and sends him flying. Geese's strength is at the level of an A rank, but Kerwin destroyed him so easily. This makes our group wonder if he has stepped into the realm of S rank. Kerwin is disappointed to hear that his match is being postponed to the next day, but Brufston says that he sends uncertainty in his attacks. Later, everyone goes to eat and they discuss how they just need Brufston and/or Rick to win and they will get the jewel thereafter. Rick isn't there because he went on his 700-kilometer run, and Angelica isn't even surprised by his craziness anymore. Rick gets pretty far from the city and he finds Kerwin training. Rick thinks that Kerwin should be more concerned about exhausting himself before his fight against Brufston, but he doesn't care. Instead, Kerwin wants to spar against Rick. Rick has no choice but to spar and he shocks Kerwin with his incredible speed. Rick is impressed to see Kerwin dodge his punch, so he wonders why he got hit one time during the tournament. Rick knows that Kerwin uses his strong sense of smell during fights, so he wonders if his nose was just stuffy. Kerwin acknowledges Rick's strength, so he decides to tell him his backstory. Kerwin grew up always looking forward to his next fight, but eventually there wasn't anything he could call a fight anymore. Things got better when he came to Heractopia, but Kerwin eventually started beating everyone there too. He was knocking people out in less than 1 minute and with just one punch. Kerwin became upset because things started getting boring again, but he thought it wouldn't be so bad because at least Nick Fury was happy. The fights became meaningless, so getting stronger was the only thing Kerwin had to look forward to. One day some guy told Fury that people are starting to get bored at the tournament because Kerwin just keeps winning with one punch. This guy warned that Fury's gym would fail if people stopped caring about fighting, so he wanted Kerwin to start losing on purpose. Fury couldn't have cared less about what this guy wanted, and there was no way he would ever tell Kerwin to throw a fight. Kerwin didn't want to cause problems for the guy that's already missing an eye, so he threw a fight so everyone would think that he was beatable. From then on, Kerwin makes some bad fighting days with good ones. He made it so the crowd would love watching the fights, and he still won 3 times in a row. Kerwin now fight for that matches are exciting and he never fights seriously. His fights draw huge crowds to the city and Fury's gym prospers. Rick seemingly wasn't even listening, and he just warns Kerwin not to take Brufston lightly. The next day, the fight is set to take place and the audience is told that defense magic has been cast over the seating area. The fight starts off the same way it did before, but this time Kerwin uses a new move. Everyone is shocked because he rotated his arm at high speed to increase the force of his blow. It was enough to knock Brufston's hand out of the way, but Brufston nearly eliminates Kerwin with his counterattack. Kerwin is impressed, but Brufston can't say the same. He can tell that Kerwin isn't fighting seriously, but Kerwin wonders if Rick spilled the beans. Bruston is just making assumptions, but Kerwin admits that he holds back for the sake of the audience. Kerwin acknowledges that Bruston is the real deal, but he still can't fight seriously. If he does, then everyone will realize that he has been holding back and throwing fights. Kerwin is ashamed, but Bruston commends him for putting others before himself. Bruston is disappointed about not being able to fight Kerwin at full strength, but it can't be helped, so he prepares to use the appropriate amount of strength for this situation. He says that he will only fight with 2 fingers and he will move a single inch from the spot you're standing in. It would be hypocritical for Kerwin to tell him to fight seriously, so he just accepts the challenge. Bruston tosses him around a bit with just his 2 fingers, and Kerwin realizes that he's also making the fight interesting. Everyone cheers for Kerwin, but Mizet can tell that Bruston is doing something clever. Kerwin thinks about how much fun it would be to fight someone like Bruston have full strength, especially because there are a lot of attacks he wants to test out. Unfortunately, Kerwin just won't let himself ruin everything. Just then Nick Fury yells at him and reveals that he sees right through Kerwin. Fury knows that Kerwin has been holding back, but he says that it has always been his dream to train up the strongest pugilists in history. He wants Kerwin to become the strongest, but Kerwin wonders if it's really okay. The old man would like nothing more, so Kerwin decides to fight to his heart's content. Kerwin has never been more excited, and he tells Bruston that there's no need to act anymore. Everyone is shocked that Bruston stops Kerwin's all-out attack, but Kerwin points out that Bruston had to use all 5 fingers to stop him. Kerwin wonders if it was an accident, but Bruston explains that he's just using the appropriate amount of strength. Bruston keeps blocking all of Kerwin's attacks, but Kerwin sees an opening. Kerwin just ends up getting tossed, but he irons up his body to avoid the impact. The 2 fighters are having a great time, but the crowd has begun to realize that Kerwin has been tricking them this entire time. There is no going back now, so Kerwin is determined to take this fight all the way. He uses level 5 nature composed magic, but Angelica points out that dog people like him are not supposed to be good with magic. This means that he must have trained himself to his limits several times. Rick is incredibly impressed, and he determines that Kerwin must be on the same level as Bruston. Everyone is shocked, and Fury thinks about how he didn't even know Kerwin could use magic. Bruston blocks the attack, but Kerwin closes the gap and prepares another spell. He dodges Bruston's attack and he manages to trap the big guy. Angelica expected no less from a champion, but Rick is worried about something. Kerwin prepares his next spell, but Bruston's teammates don't seem to be worried. The same can't be said for the crowd though, as they are shocked when Kerwin prepares to use level 8 magic. He created a giant ball of energy, and Rick was horrified to see how bad things are getting. Angelica has never seen Rick like this, and he just says that Kerwin is far stronger than he imagined. What's most terrifying though is that this means Bruston will stop holding back. Bruston breaks free from their trap and determines that Kerwin should be able to take the attack it's about to use. Kerwin's giant bowl of energy is just getting bigger, but the entire card is shocked when Bruston just uses brute strength to stop the attack. Bruston acknowledges Kerwin's new will to fight, and everyone is shocked when he gives a quarter's thumbs up. It's a tradition in orc battles, and it means that both fighters will abandon evasions and defense to simply exchange blows. Rick is horrified to hear this because it means that Bruston will just be attacking for the rest of the fight. Kerwin feels something he has never felt before, and he wonders if this feeling is the thing called terror. Bruston is so fast that Kerwin's sense of smell is useless against him, and he gets thrown back from just the shockwave or Bruston's punch. Kerwin uses different types of level 7 magic, but it's no use. Bruston just keeps moving forward and he isn't even blinking. Everyone is sure that Kerwin is out of energy after using so many spells, and Bruston lands a punch. Angelica thinks it was a direct hit, but Rick explains that it wasn't. Kerwin used several moves to avoid getting destroyed. His bones and organs are still messed up pretty badly, but any other person would have been dead at now. Kerwin considers giving up for a moment, but he has always wished for an opponent like Bruston. This is the fight he has been looking for his entire life, so he angrily tells himself to get up. Kerwin is all out of magic, but he refuses to give up, so he declares that he still has his physical strength. Kerwin unleashes a flurry of punches, but Rick knows that he won't last long after taking so much damage. Kerwin eventually collapses, and he's surprised to learn the guys as strong as Bruston really do exist. Just then everyone begins to cheer for Kerwin. Kerwin is touched to hear them cheering even after he deceived them for so long, so he stands up once more. The audience goes crazy and Kerwin prepares to throw one final punch. He is out of magic and strength, but he says that this is when it's time to choose away at his own spirit for fuel. Kerwin is covered in flames as he combines several techniques and he unleashes his attack. Everyone watches absolutely amazed by the grand display of power, but this incredible attack does nothing to Brufston. Brufston commends him for the impressive attack and wonders if he has used every last drop of energy he had. Kerwin can only laugh as he realizes that he couldn't even move Brufston, but he says that this fight was the most fun he has ever had in his entire life. Kerwin has earned Brufston's respect, and he shows it by punching him right in the face. Old Man Fury acknowledges that Kerwin has lost, but he still considers him to be the greatest pugilist in history. Kerwin collapses as he's out for the count, but the joy this fight brought him makes him smile. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.